Papa's turn. Papa climbed up. Flashlight men positioned his feet and legs so they would not touch the motor. Papa put his head and upper body on the tiny tabletop, curling his body to make it smaller. For an instant before the hood was closed, Papa's eyes caught Marco's. Marco turned away so he wouldn't have to see his father humbled in this manner. Vámonos, said Coyote Lady, and she wedged into the driver's seat. Flashlight Man sat on the passenger side. A Chargers football banner and blue pom-poms sat on the dashboard as further proof of their deception. The car backed out of the alley and left. Marco closed the gate behind them. He paced up and down the alley. They had said it would take an hour round trip. The minutes crawled by. Why did Papa agree to do this? Why did he resign himself to these people? It is the way it is, Papa had said. Marco went back into the basement room and walked in circles. After 1 hour, he put in a tape, Aladdin, and tried to pay attention as the characters sang about a whole new world. It was so easy in the video to get on a flying carpet to reach a magical place. Where is this new world? Where's Papa? Did he get through? Marco had never once heard a story of someone crossing over under the hood of a car. He tried to imagine being inside, next to the engine. His stomach churned. Where's my magic carpet? The door opened suddenly. Flashlight Man was back. Let's go, he said. The car was already positioned in the alley with the hood up. Coyote Lady took Marco's backpack and threw it in the trunk. Marco climbed up on the bumper and swung his legs over the motor, then sat on the makeshift ledge. Flashlight Man arranged Marco's legs as if he were in a running position, one leg up, knee bent, one leg straighter but slightly bent. Marco slowly lowered himself onto his side and put his head on the tabletop. Then he crossed his arms around his chest and watched the sunlight disappear to a tiny crack as the hood was closed. Don't move in there, said Flashlight Man. Don't worry, thought Marco. My fear will not permit me to move. The motor started. The noise hurt his ears, and within minutes it was hot. The smell of motor oil and gasoline accosted his nostrils. He breathed through his mouth, straining his lips toward the slit where the light crept through for fresh air. The car moved along for about 10 minutes until they reached the lanes of traffic that led to the border crossing. Then it was stop and go, stop and go. Marco's legs began to cramp, but he knew not to move 1 inch. He tried not to imagine what would happen if he rolled in onto the inner workings of the car. The car lurched and stopped over and over. Marco wanted to close his eyes, but he was afraid that he would get dizzy or disoriented. He watched the small crack between the car and hood as if it were his lifeline. A flash of color obliterated his line of sunlight as a flower vendor stopped in front of the car, trying to make one last sale to those in the car next to him. Flores! Flores! You buy cheap! The line of cars started to move again, but the flower vendor continued to walk in front of their car. Coyote Lady pressed on the horn. Marco's body trembled as the sound reverberated through his body. He inched his hands up to cover his ears. The vendor stepped out of the way, and the car began to move faster. Marco never knew when they actually crossed the line. He only knew when the car began to speed up on the freeway. His body pulsed with the vibrations of the car. Afraid to close his eyes, he watched beads of moisture move across the radiator as if they had the ability to dance. Marco could not feel his right foot. It had fallen asleep. Panic crept into his chest and seized his muscles. He slowly pressed his hand back and forth across his chest to relieve the tightness. No worries, he whispered. No worries. The car stopped and shook with the door being slammed. Marco heard someone fiddling with the hood latch. Light streamed into his eyes and he squinted. Flashlight Man pulled him from the car and handed over his backpack. Marco stumbled from his dead foot and his body still rocked with the feeling of the moving car. He looked around. He was in a parking lot behind an auto shop. Papa was waiting. "We made it," said Papa, clapping Marco on the back. "We're in Chula Vista." Marco said nothing. He couldn't hear what Papa had said because of the noise in his ears, as if they were filled with cotton and bees. He felt as if he'd been molested, his body misappropriated. He pulled away from Papa's arm and climbed into the waiting van, this one with seats and windows. The door slid shut. Marco turned his face to the window and saw Coyote Lady and Flashlight Man driving away. The others in the van smiled and talked as if they'd all just come from a party. The relief of a successful crossing seemed to have unleashed their tongues. Marco listened as they talked of their jobs in towns he'd never heard of before. Escondido, Solana Beach, Poway, Oceanside. Papa told them that he and his son were going to Encinitas to work in the flower fields and that it was his son's first time crossing over. Faces turned toward Marco. Marco cringed, his discomfort showing. Why did he have to mention me? One of the men laughed out loud. "At least you were not rolled in the mattress like I was on my first time." "Or like me," said a young woman, grinning. "They dressed me as an abuelita, a grandmother with a wig and old clothes, and had me walk across with another woman's identification. I was shaking the entire time." Marco could only force a smile, but everyone else laughed. Stories spilled from their lips about their first times or their friends or family members. Hiding inside hollowed out bales of hay, cramped inside a hide-a-bed sofa from which the bed frame had been removed, buried in the middle of a truckload of crates filled with cackling chickens. Marco found himself chuckling and nodding in co-misery. An almost giddy air seemed to prevail as they all reveled in one another's bizarre stories and sometimes life-threatening circumstances. He found himself eager to hear of each exploit and began feeling oddly proud and somehow connected to this unrelated group. A strange camaraderie seemed to permeate the air, and when one man told how he was hidden in a door panel of a truck, smashed in a fetal position for 1 hour, and thought he might suffocate, Marco laughed the hardest. As the people were dropped off in towns along the way north, they shook hands with Marco and Papa and left them with the words, "Buena suerte," good luck. When Papa and Marco were the only ones left in the van, and the driver finally headed up Freeway 5 toward Encinitas, Papa grinned at him. "Okay now?" Marco nodded. "Okay." He looked out the window at the people in the cars on the freeway. They were all headed somewhere in the United States of America. Marco wondered how many were headed to a whole new world.